Talk about you got this and you got that, and you gonna murder this one and murder that one. Talking all that bullshit. I'm gonna put it to you like this, yo.
This is for the nerds, this is for the brainiacs, this what we deserve. Go ahead and play it back, you ain't gonna touch me, you not gonna do nothing, you are not above me. I bet you wish you was me, I know it, I know.
What is poppin', everybody? And welcome back to another special episode of the Only Friends podcast. Well, you know, it's me and my only friends, which happens to include the puppies.
Wow, Pip knows.
Oh, yeah. Pip,
Pip
Pip's coming
Get back over here.
I got all the dogs, guys. I got all the dogs.
You got it popping
They're
over here.
eating the dogs.
Yeah, you can eat them?
No.
Brian's really
I don't
hungry.
know. Bruce looks a little tasty.
It does look like a chicken nugget, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it.
I'm being attacked.
Also, what's poppin', Matt Hunt?
Hey man, I'm glad you threw it to the dogs instead of me. I feel like the dogs deserve it more.
They got it. I mean, they got to get it.
This is going to be
I'm here every week. The dogs aren't always here.
It's true. Not Brucey, boy.
So,
This is insufferable.
this
What's
is great.
that?
These two idiots,
You eat three.
What, the dogs or Conrad and Brian?
Conrad and Brian. Goes without saying, nobody would ever speak poorly of these pups.
God.
Oh, Jesus Christ! Here we go.
You cut me right in the
Where did she get you?
dingleberries.
This is menace behavior from the dogs.
How'd
That's
you get the
true.
beans
menacing.
above the fray?
All right, Pip, go take a nap. It's nap time. When the podcast starts, it's nap time.
So, what's your plans lately?
What the hell are you saying?
This is how I'm going to talk for the rest of the
Oh, he's just reacting to being hit in the, what was it, the dingleberries? Was it?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you are a fucking dingleberry. All right, we have a fun.
I like
fun
this jacket,
one today.
by the way. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
That
It's a
was
nice
great.
jacket.
Did you
It's a
steal his
solid,
jacket?
Solid
No, I gave it to him.
jacket.
It was too big for me, so Landon's gonna fill it out.
I'm
Yeah.
really surprised
Why?
that you didn't order an extra small
No.
to begin with.
it's
Like
a
you order
jacket.
all your t-shirts.
it's
It's
not-
medium.
It's
Yeah.
not really too big for me. I wore it in the Poker Out Loud season. I thought it looked okay.
Look kind of puffy.
Well, I wear a hoodie underneath it.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's the problem.
No. I mean, I'm not young. I can't pull off, a varsity jacket without a hood. Got to make it look like it's an athletic jacket.
Is that what happened? Is that how that works?
Yeah, I think that's how that works.
Like, you're supposed to wear this over a jacket?
You're not supposed. You can do whatever you want.
I was gonna say noticed the wash of the jeans with the color.
Yeah, you did great.
Yeah, I had navy on first. Like, you can't do that.
No, because of the black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see you put your cuffs down today.
Maybe you should have saved this for Wednesday, Landon.
No, I know, but this time, like, it's good length. The other ones are too long, and they would have hit my heel, so I had to roll them.
There's an easy fix for that.
Get them tailored.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, you had to roll them, but you turned them into shants.
No, I just moved them up. So like when I am walking normally, it doesn't seem the same. But like when I lift my leg, it's gonna like.
I see. I understand now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there you go, guys. That's your
We're getting
pant
there,
lesson of
okay?
the day. You know how that goes.
You guys really picked the great topics when I'm on air.
Oh,
Yeah.
you should have saw yesterday. It was 25 minutes of
Of fashion.
discussion.
Wow.
Yeah, you might want to get in on this one.
Well,
Hunt.
some-
Well, he has to if he
Sometimes-
comes in on a Wednesday.
That's
Sometimes
We're having
you,
a fashion show next
sometimes
week.
I come in and then you just launch into Steelers talk, and I'm like, why am I even here? So like, I'm glad you didn't do that this week.
What's your take on Russell
Only
Wilson?
Fridays.
on Russell Wilson?
Yeah.
Who the fuck is that?
Exactly.
That's my
Exactly.
take.
You probably know him as Mr. Unlimited.
I literally don't know him at all. It just sounds like the most generic name of all time. It's just some guy named Russell Wilson. He could be a truck driver for all I know.
I mean, honestly.
There's probably a truck driver out there named Russell Wilson.
Yeah,
might
shout out
end
to
up-
truck driver Wilson.
He might end up as the truck driver, to be quite honest, when it's all said and done.
He might lead the Steelers to a Super Bowl.
He might.
As soon as we get Cooper Kupp on our team.
See, now you did this, Hunt. We had no intentions.
You know what I should have recognized is that you guys are, if someone mentions the Steelers,
Yes.
you guys are incapable,
Right.
like physically incapable of
100%.
not having an entire conversation about the Steelers.
We
That
got
is
a
correct.
lot to say.
Even when
know?
you had a conversation about them yesterday or the day before, it's every single day. I'm
Right.
baffled by it, but I should just take it into account.
Well,
before
now
I
they
come
think
in.
they're getting Cooper Kupp, and so do the betting odds. But my
Do
friend,
the betting odds too?
the betting odds, you got them at minus
Yeah,
125.
but don't worry. Conrad has inside information
Whoa,
because
Chad Ochocinco himself
I will take him too.
has come and said that it looks like he's going to either San Fran or I forgot who the other person was.
They're not going to trade him in division.
Wasn't the Cardinals?
That's what I said.
It was somebody else.
It's Tampa Bay.
Tampa Bay, yes.
Which he's
Tampa
actually
Bay.
like plus 600 to go to.
Interesting. Isn't everybody? Well, Cooper was hurt, but he's fine.
He's always hurt.
Huh? Yeah, no, he's
always
back.
fine.
He's playing tonight.
Yeah.
Like everyone would be interested.
Today's
in Cooper Kupp.
Thursday?
He's great.
He's old.
Today's Thursday.
He's
Today is
expensive.
Thursday, yeah.
He's old. He's expensive. He's hurt.
Old. How old is old?
31.
That's not that old.
Backside of the
football.
goal. That's definitely football old.
Football.
How old is Derrick Henry?
28.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Which is crazy
Because that's old for a
Now,
running
that's
back,
old
right?
for a running back.
But
Receivers are a little bit
but
more.
he's a different type of running back. Like
He's an anomaly. You know, he's a survivor.
He's
He
a
has
mach-
like 7,000
machine.
yards after contact.
I just want to go on record and say I didn't do any of this today. I was fully going to launch into poker, but
Yeah, I
It's
shouldn't.
Hunt's fault.
I shouldn't
It's-
have called you guys out on it
it's
because
it's
even
incredibly Hunt's
after
fault.
being called out on it,
Right.
it still prompted you guys to
I
launch into
literally
a
wasn't thinking
conversation.
about
Like, did
I
you
really
think
wasn't
we
thinking about
cared?
Yeah.
it would only prompt the conversation
Right.
in reality.
Right. My mind wasn't there. Then you put my mind there, and here we
Yeah.
are.
Well,
Yeah.
since we're talking about getting called out, maybe you can explain why you're such a shitty coach because you won half of
I'm
the prize
fucking
pool
terrible.
once.
Oh my god, I don't know, man. I like you guys probably noticed. I am completely done with Twitter now. I deleted my Twitter. I'm so over Twitter.
Gave the
altogether.
X to X.
I did, yeah. I completely just removed myself. Not because of any specific experience other than just like I went off Twitter for a couple days and I logged in one time and then this bullshit happened. And I was like, one check of Twitter is all it takes for me to get involved in a conversation where I'm like, what the fuck is going on? So my Twitter's nuked. I'm gone.
Still have your burner
I'm done
account?
from Twitter. My what?
Your burner account.
I never had one.
Oh,
Actually.
we're gonna get
I
you
never
one.
actually had a
we
burner
gotta
account.
get you an account.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just get a burn account. Talk
and then
shit
just-
to everybody you don't
exactly.
I should have done that. I should have replied to this
You really should
conversation with a
not.
burner account.
No, it's not good, man. Honestly, like,
Who got caught with a burner account? Oh, Kevin Durant.
oh yeah.
Kevin Durant was talking shit.
I
to
thought he was
fans.
just doing it from Maine. He tends to talk shit just straight from Maine.
Yeah, he does.
No, the KD burner account lore was so good. He was
Yeah.
just replying to himself all the time. He's like, "Is that you?"
The Twitter streets are not for normies. That's for sure.
No, I've decided I want to be a normie now, so I'm out of there. I'm gone.
Yeah, I can understand why. I mean, like, truth of the matter is that, like, that discussion, for anybody who's not familiar with what we're talking about, there was a thread where Solve4Y posted Matt's results in a PKO and basically said, you know, check out his new course, low-hanging fruit for marketing. And one of the regs in the pool, Kevin, I can't pronounce that, Garrison.
Yeah.
Wow, would not,
Garashim?
that's a strong way to spell Garrison.
Garashim sounds great.
Anyway,
Garashim.
basically threw a little shade because you got a little, you stepped out a little.
I
in the
did.
small
I mean,
blind.
it was not really a particularly remarkable hand at all. I flatted super wide in the small blind in a spot where it was a bounty tournament.
Oh my God, you're a punter.
Yeah, I know, right? I covered him by a lot. I flatted wide. Like, it was probably a little wider than what a solver would say, but most of our solver models for PKOs are pretty wrong anyway. The big blind had a big bounty, you know, all this stuff. I flopped a full house. He punted. I busted him, and now he's really mad about it. So it just all kind of stemmed from, I guess, whatever saltiness was left over from him, you know, finding a punt against me in this spot, and, you know, all of a sudden I'm getting called out for, you know, what's like a $10 losing play or something in a solver, and now I'm a terrible coach or whatever. So who knows what goes through the minds of the Twitter.
You're not allowed to
Twitter
make
people.
mistakes, man.
Well,
I know, I'm really not.
I don't even think it's that. Because listen, as a guy who's, you know,
It's literally all
been in
because
this
of
world a bit.
It's because of the marketing post.
You
It's
mean-
because we attached you.
Yes, that's
right.
part of it
They were
for
like,
sure.
"How can this guy be a coach? If
No,
he
no,
made
no,
this
no.
one bad play ever in his entire life." But
give a little bit more credit.
I'm not going to give any credit.
Give more credit to it's Berkey's fault.
Yeah, it's
'Cause it's
definitely
always Berkey's
It's always
fault.
Berkey's fault. No, but I mean, it's just like
More seriously speaking,
I do think that, like, you know, people see you play one hand that you said maybe is losing a little bit, and then they take it, and that encompasses your entire strategy and knowledge of the game.
That's not actually what's happening.
What's happening, Berk? Tell me.
It's just low hanging fruit to take a shot at somebody.
Right.
It's very Polkian, right? He obviously doesn't. I mean, yes, literally, what's happening is he's questioning Hunt's credentials as a coach because he misplayed one hand. But what's really happening beneath the surface is it's just call out culture, where people are trying to shit on one another in order to elevate themselves. Right? He busted an event in a way that I personally don't care for the line he took, but who cares? Take a line, don't take a line. Who gives a shit? Right. And you know, it allows. It's basically saying I'm better than you. Is what the messaging there is. Right. And that's what it's always been. That's always been Polk's stance whenever he spends hundreds of hours making videos endlessly about other players in his purview, in his arena, or maybe adjacent to his arena, and why they're shit based off of this one example. It's just bad faith. And
yeah, for sure.
And I think like that's why. Yeah, and I think like that's why Hunt responded with such vitriol, where it's like, you know, there's another approach you can take. You could just have saw that comment and just been like, I was gambling.
And I really should have done. Like, I almost replied to it just being like, it was a misclick. You know, just say it was a misclick, even though it wasn't. But I got wrapped up in this, and this was the point where I was like, I can't trust myself with Twitter anymore. Like,
I think that's the deeper conversation that's worth having is like, that's really valid. The negative like rage bait cycle that exists on there, it's so prevalent, and it's so easy to fall down that rabbit hole. You know, like Hunt was chatting with us in the group chat, and he was like, you know, this is kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like, I don't blame you one bit. If I didn't have to be on Twitter, I would certainly leave Twitter. It's not the same place it was 5 years ago.
Right.
But moreover, I was just like, man, one tweet thread. Imagine if you had a guy just making 30-minute videos of you once a week, where half a million people watch it.
Doug made 2 minutes about me, and I was just like mauling over it for weeks, you know. So like I'm
good
not
use
cut
of
out.
the term mauled.
I know, right? Yeah. I'm not cut out for the Twitter streets, I don't think. But I think the thing that frustrated me the most about the whole thing, or the kind of irony of it, I guess, is that I kind of made this comment in the conversation of like, oh, you being a punter had something to do with me flatting.
Right.
And that was more from like when I was actually thinking about it in game, I was like, I wasn't thinking like this guy's a fish, because I know he's a pro, I know he's a reg. I was thinking this is a bounty event. This guy plays more aggro than average. I cover him by a lot. I have more incentive to play a wide range against this guy, because when I flop like decent equity, he's going to put more chips in, and I'm going to get closer to being able to potentially bust him. It was more along those lines of like, I'm going to play wide against this guy because he's aggro in the punter sense.
Yeah.
And the funny thing that happened is like, I flopped a full house. He literally had a hand that shouldn't open pre, called a check raise with a hand that shouldn't call a check raise, bet the turn with a hand that shouldn't bet the turn. He did all the things I expected him to do. Like, I flatted because he was like a punter, quote unquote. He punted, and now I'm the asshole. Like, I'm the idiot. You know, it's so bizarre the way that these things get interpreted, and the way that now, like, because I made a certain play that if you look at it in a complete vacuum, it's easy for him to represent on Twitter that this is a mistake and I'm a fish or whatever. But like, through another lens, I expected a certain thing to happen based on my opponent's tendencies. That exact thing happened, and I benefited from it. So I'm not going to make this argument because I still think it probably was a mistake, but you could easily make an argument that against that type of player, this play actually is good. So it's just, after a while, I was like, well, what are we even doing here? You know,
well,
like,
what are we even doing in the first place?
Right. Like, why are we even having this conversation?
I think that stems from, and maybe the poker Twitter sphere falling down the cesspool, or becoming the cesspool that it has, maybe is also adjacent to this, but that's the measuring stick that we've created in the last 5 to 6 years with solvers being so prevalent. If your play is not approved in a vacuum, then it's just not approved. And
like, you're bad because of it.
Correct. Yeah,
and because you did that, you don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to coaching.
Right, and the thing is that people get hyper defensive as well, rather than just like having some degree of confidence that it's like, whatever, man, I'm just gonna do what I do. Like,
I'm doing me.
Like for instance, the whole back and forth that we had or that I had, I guess, with Jonathan that turned into a fight with Daniel, which is so ironic. More I think back on it, it's like, what an LOL thing where it's like Jonathan and I barely had a spat, and then Daniel white knighted to a point where like we almost fist fought over it. Like, what a ridiculous thing. But
good for you.
The initial back and forth and disagreement was over a concept, over an idea, over a theoretical principle. Right?
And
like,
barely even over that, more about the way it was expressed, right?
Correct,
it's like not even about the actual idea itself, just about the way that Jonathan represented a concept in that particular tweet that you pointed out.
Right, which ultimately we found out was, directly quoting something Daniel had said, which is why I think he butted in.
I never knew that. I never knew that was why.
So the long and short of it is, I guess Jonathan has a team of people that like scour through poker content. And they pull things from it to make these social media posts. And they had pulled from a super high rollerball interview with Daniel where he was talking about playing a spot against Nick Petrangelo. And he basically said like, yeah, like, a queen high board where I have ace 10 out of position versus Nikki P and I'm facing a c-bet. Like, I just fold this hand because I'm just going to lose down the line with it, basically. Like, I'm not going to realize my equity appropriately. I'm not going to play like a solver kind of thing. And like, that's a fine and reasonable statement. I don't think anybody would argue too hard against that. But that got flipped into the social media post of, are you trying to represent or replicate solver strategy? Be mindful of the fact that you could just fold hands that are making a ton of money. And they gave the example of like folding a hand that's making almost a big blind by calling.
Now I feel like I understand this whole chaotic argument better than I did before, because I never really understood how Daniel came to be involved in it. Because I knew there was the ace 10 discussion, and then I knew there was the discussion about Daniel folding nines.
So that's where I was going with this. Yeah,
like that's how it evolved, and then suddenly Daniel's fucking criticizing me. Like,
right,
I'm taking shots from everybody again.
Right. So that's where I was
always
going.
Catch the strays.
I know, I'm catching his strays every time.
That's where I was going with this. Is that like we've created this framework of judgment by utilizing the solver and vacuum scenarios and yada yada yada, and we kind of like hold people's feet to the fire for it. But like, even in that example where I disagreed with Daniel folding nines, facing a one big blind bet on an ace high board or whatever, and there's like really no scenario that we can create where this is a winning play. Even with all of that being said, it's still a hand. Like, no part of me was saying like, oh, well, D-Negs obviously isn't a good tournament player because of this hand, or he's completely discredited as a voice in this community because of this hand. It's more so just like, well, here's another example why the thing that you're saying right now just doesn't really hold water. And I'm a qualified eye to be able to point that out. Whatever. The Twitter universe as it currently exists, I feel like is it's just a ton of noise where this game beats you down so badly, and we're going to get into this when we start talking downswings a bit, but the game can beat you down so badly, and it can suppress you for such a long period of time, especially if you're an MTT grinder where like it's feast or famine, but even with cash, you go through these long spells of breaking even or losing, whatever, and it's so much of a negative feedback that I think we start to clamor for validation in some other capacity. It's like you look to your peers where it's like, validate me. Like, I'm better than this guy, right?
And yeah, and it happens a lot with, I see it from my students sometimes. Like, people will send me hands and they'll just want me to just tell them like they're not crazy. Like just tell me, just reassure me that it's not punting to make this play or whatever. And then sometimes it'll be a hand that'll be absolutely just the most standard thing ever. And they'll want validation that they can't like get away from ace king off 25 bigs or something like that. And it's like, you know this, like, that you just can never get away from this. How this hand is supposed to play. And the need for validation is strong enough that when you're going through a downswing, when you're going through a rough patch, it can overwhelm what you normally know about the game. Like, you can get to a point where you doubt yourself and you need that level of validation to the point where you'll start thinking in a very warped way about the game as a whole, and you start questioning plays that you make. You start questioning everything that you know about the game just because you're on kind of a downswing. And it happens to everybody, but it also has an effect on how people interact with Twitter and stuff like that.
It's always like a results oriented type of thing, right? It's like you said with the ace king, you're just like, yeah, like of course it's just going in, but like then they show up with kings or aces. You're just like, I just knew it.
Yeah,
I knew I could have got away because I knew they had it, but it's just like, no, they have all these other hands too.
Yeah, and there's so many instances where you can see people getting defensive or reacting to certain things in certain ways because there's this kind of need for somebody else to validate what they're doing, or somebody else to kind of pile on. And I think that happened in this Twitter thread. You know, like Kevin responded, I said something back to him, and it could have ended there. Like he like made fun of me flatting 10-7. I said, like, given the way that you played that hand, I wouldn't be throwing stones. That could have been it. It could have been one exchange, right? But then people who presumably were Kevin's friends started like piling on, and Kevin responded again. And it just became this snowball of like, they're all validating each other by talking about how bad they think I am. And I'm getting wrapped up in trying to defend myself at a time when I really shouldn't bother with it. And on some level, that's me needing validation as well, of me being like, actually, no, I don't suck as much as you guys think I do. You know, so
it's also invalidating. It's also like an attempt to invalidate the thing that's being celebrated.
Right.
It's like, oh, you just had this accomplishment. Let me jump in that thread and tell you why you're a piece of shit. You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of the bigger overarching thing that I'm speaking to. It's like, I get what you're saying. Like, downswings can push people in certain directions, but I almost think that's healthier to extend an invite to a coach and be like, hey, can you just make sure that I'm not losing my mind? Like, I'm supposed to be losing with these hands, kind of thing.
Oh yeah, that's
even though
completely
it's super
reasonable.
standard.
I didn't mean to suggest that was like not a thing that people should do. I just mean it's a tendency that comes up, and it's evidence of how strong the need for validation is sometimes.
Precisely. And to be fair, the better you get, the less you need that. But I do think that it's very different than what I often see on social media, where it's more people clamoring for peer review validation in a sense of make me feel like a good person by telling me that I'm good at the game. Right. And it's requested in the shittiest of ways. Right. Like, because it's attention seeking, but it's also rage baiting. And, you know, at scale, that's Polk's whole model. But at an individual level, that is jumping into a thread that has nothing to do with you, commenting on a hand that you didn't see or play, and, you know, telling one of the two parties that they're particularly not good because of this one specific hand.
Yeah, what I couldn't get my head around is just the initial impulse of, like, clearly Kevin he must follow our Twitter account or something, the company Twitter. Something led him to see the marketing tweet that we made about me winning a PKO, and then some impulse led him to want to reply in that way. And I just the place that kind of impulse comes from, it just doesn't feel like a healthy one. And I
don't think it's a Kevin thing, by the way.
It's everybody on Twitter.
Yeah,
it's
I mean, like, this dates all the way back to the initial birth of Twitter. Like, somebody wins a tournament, they post that result, and somebody who got knocked out by that person comes in and tells them the shitty hand that they played.
I mean, this is, I guess, if anything, what I'm saying is this is the inherent nature of social media and how it's built. Like, it's built for people to be able to take shots in this kind of a way, right? And I don't know whether the algorithm presented this post to Kevin because it's just poker related and it came up on his like For You thing, or if he actually follows us. But if he's actually following us, you know, it kind of begs the question of how much of a trend there is on Twitter in particular, but other social media as well, of people just like rage following certain accounts. You know, like, it's definitely a thing that someone will follow a certain account and they'll just kind of use it as like, oh, look at what this dumbass posted. You know, look at what this person that I don't like posted. and I'm going to reply to it and talk shit about them or something like that. And it just, that trend, I think alone, whether it's, poker players, whoever else, like that's such a toxic trend in itself, but it's the algorithm that does that to people.
Yeah. I also think it's like I think that people have lost sight of, or maybe social media just amplifies our innate desire to want to do this, but having fun at other people's expense seems more common now than it was when I was in elementary and high school. You know what I mean? So it's like, I imagine that there was a certain sentiment from Kevin's perspective where it was just like, oh, I'm just having a little fun. I'm just ribbing you in this particular notion. But it's like when you do it publicly like that, it's like, well, maybe that truly was the intention, but that's not the end result.
Right.
And the end result is disqualification.
And I really wouldn't have cared if it had ended there. Like when I posted my first reply, he liked my reply. So I was like, I thought of it as like, oh, this is, we're just kind of having a bit of fun, like talking shit at each other. And then he was like, yeah, I know I'm a punter, but I'm not shilling coaching. So now he's escalated it to like, he's questioning my coaching. And so I'm like, okay, now this discussion is going to a place that I didn't want it to go.
Right, because now professionally you have to defend your ability to actually offer coaching.
And this is the frustrating thing about Twitter for me over time is that it used to there was definitely a point of, for a long time I've been thinking about like, do I even want to be on Twitter? But there was a point where I was like, well, I don't really want to be there, but it's useful for me professionally for promoting myself and things like that. But I feel like the algorithm has now kind of deteriorated to the point where I don't even feel like I get a lot from being able to promote myself on there because it favors rage bait so hard now that when you're not posting rage bait, you don't have a lot of visibility. You don't get a lot of traction on posts in the way that like I could see less traction on certain posts than what I would have had if I posted the same thing 2, 3, 5 years ago.
Right.
Because the algorithm is different now or whatever. So we're heading more and more in that direction where actually using it in a productive way to promote your work and things like that is harder and harder because the preference for rage bait is just amplified so much. And it just got to a point now where
I'm not even positive.
No benefit for me.
I'm not even positive that's the algorithm, to be honest.
Or it could not be. It might be the sort of human algorithm of people's behaviors.
Well, what I was going to say is I think that behaviorally what we've seen the trend be over the last X amount of years, and it seems to just like
X. That's a good
good
pun.
It seems to just kind of continually grow exponentially. Is that once upon a time, posts were met with positive feedback, positive reinforcement, positive validation, whatever. And this, you could go all the way back to Facebook. Like you post something on Facebook, it was only the like button. Matter of fact, I don't even think the like button existed at first. So you had to comment. And most of the time, because people couldn't just blindly follow you, had to accept your friends. So it was a closed circle that was coming in there. And
that was when Facebook was good. Like I remember the early
you still
years
have to accept
Facebook.
Your friends, but they can.
Well, I haven't been on Facebook since 2017. I quit Facebook in 2017, and that was actually a big part of deciding to quit Twitter. I was like, I quit Facebook, and that was a good idea. So I should just quit Twitter too. You know, like I was like, that helped.
But yeah, like so you had to actually comment and leave feedback, and generally it trended very positively because accounts didn't grow into the millions. Like you had hundreds of followers, maybe 1,000 or a few thousand if you were popular or whatever. Same thing was true on Twitter. Like positive posts would gain traction because they had a lot of interaction. Somewhere along the lines, though, that flipped. And what happened was the good people became observers. And I know this like first-handedly because the interactions I have with people one-on-one in real life or even via DMs is very different than the energy that's brought to my mentions. Right? People who have the most visceral are the most vocal. The droves of trolls suddenly became amplified as they had numbers. And the people who could actually get in there and do a little bit of heavy lifting by validating a certain person or invalidating a certain idea tend to just sit on the sidelines and watch it all play out. And what we end up with is the dog in the fire meme, where it's just like, this is fine. I still have to be here. I swear I have to be here. I have to engage. But the only engagement you're really ever getting is just like heavily skewed negatively, I think.
As someone that may or may not have been attacked in the past on social media platforms,
Come on.
far and wide, I've learned you just don't respond.
Right. Correct. I mean, the biggest accounts just don't interact.
Right.
And there's a reason for that, because like at some point they recognize that you gain nothing from the interaction, and
It actually makes it
rage
worse.
bait is a good thing.
Well, it makes it worse for a couple reasons. A, now you feel like you're invested in the conversation by defending yourself, which is always going to go negatively, especially if the rage baiters will do what they do and they're really good at it, because it's like a colony. You know, like someone doesn't like you, people will pile on, like the tweet, you get ratio, and then it's like L plus ratio plus you suck. Like go through that timeline, and then you've now interacted with them, which has given them the platform to swing back, and now you have put yourself in a spot that you feel like you need to defend yourself when you could have just not interacted in the first place and preserved your mental sanity.
And I think this speaks to the difference between probably people of your generation who are more accustomed to seeing social media as like your social media accounts are your brand almost, whereas I have always treated Twitter a bit more like what the early days of Facebook were, where it was a way to just interact with people, right? And it was a way to interact with people where you didn't really have to think too much about how you were presenting your brand. And
well, that's because only your friends really saw your posts.
That's what I mean. Like, so over time, I think one of the reasons why social media has become more difficult for me specifically is because I never really adjusted to trying to see it as this is my brand that I have to manage and present, and I have to think about how it looks when I interact with people in a certain way. I always had the habit of trying to, or I guess naturally interacting in a way where it was a bit like just a regular conversation or how I would react in real life. And I think that's a bad strategy these days, because now if you're going to have a social media account that isn't just a burner account, and you're going to actually try to like build a following and stuff, you just have to manage it in a certain way. And I never really picked up on that.
There's definitely a difference in the way that well, it's funny because once you get that said brand, you most likely stop tweeting as much because you realize that it does become a time sink as well. Like you can do so many other things besides respond to people on Twitter that are trying to take a jab or take shots in a way that make you feel uncomfortable. And it's easier to just let it go. And it doesn't really matter as much as you think it does, in the sense of the post that gets like interaction or gets engagement. It's not going to change anything, but what changes is your mentality in dealing with the post moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's very much the modern kind of attitude to social media. But I spent way too much time on old school Facebook. And I think my approach to social media got conditioned by that. And I never really adjusted to the fact that once you get on Twitter and you have a certain, I think I only ever had like 2,000 something followers, but even when you have 2,000 people reading what you say, you have to think about it a certain way. And it was always difficult for me to adjust to that.
I do think, like, good point that you did say was about ego and how that feels when someone that's in the community that you respect to a degree because they're a professional, they say something that discredits you, and it's like, oh man, like I now need to prove to them that I'm good at what I do. And as someone that may or may not have been attacked on social media many times over again, I realized from experience that doing that does simply come from a place of ego or wanting to like feel respected. Mm-hmm. And if someone's taking those shots at you in the first place, they don't respect you anyway, so you're not going to win them over.
Right.
Yeah. Just a waste of time.
It's an interesting thing to me because I find Twitter to be so informative. Like, I think it's the easiest way to be dialed into pop culture.
Yeah, you can be. You
That's
can also
basically what the only thing I use Twitter for is for the information. Like, I don't post a lot. I don't, I go on.
Your Twitter's the biggest dumpster fire of anyone in this room.
How would you know?
Because I know what shows up here every day. And I know the topics of conversation. It's fucking politics and Tay Swift, and that's it.
No.
All right,
just politics.
Housewives of New Jersey.
Dude,
all that stuff.
I don't know how
you guys
I dodged this bullet, by the way.
All that is on Instagram. Right? Yeah, if you go to my Instagram, it's Taylor Swift, it's Housewives, it's all that stuff, right? Twitter, but I use Twitter for like information, and I curate lists.
Hey,
right, I stay off the For You. I go to lists. I have a list for, I do have a list for politics. I have a list for crypto. I have a list for the Pirates. I have a list for different sports.
That's
like
actually
stuff I
smart.
want to see, right? So then like I can put the people in there that I want to.
Brian has a very wholesome
credible.
Twitter, okay? I'm looking through his Twitter right now. All I'm seeing here is podcast stuff for us. I'm seeing Pittsburgh sports. I'm seeing retweeting to help Conrad get smart and rich. I'm seeing...
But none of that's what I'm talking about.
He's talking about like my For You list.
No. Well, yes, but like everything, all of that is
He's
just
probably
like
just really talking about his DMs, like mad OnlyFans girls just
Yes.
flying in
Yeah.
there and shit.
no,
only friends, girls.
all that stuff
All
you're reading
50%.
off is just the echo chamber that you curate. What I don't think that's important at all from Twitter. I don't think there's much value there. I think the value is being able to have a bird's eye view of all the shit that you disagree with, all of the pop culture trends that are taking place. Like, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, kind of in jest, about just like getting older and there being a disconnect with youth. Like that bridge is largely, or that gap is largely closed if you are actually actively keeping up with the times. And past generations would struggle with that. The only way they could do it was through their own children, and that was cringe as fuck. Like, your mom bopping along to In Sync while driving us to the mall. It's like, can you not? But a lot of things like TikTok and even Instagram Reels, the majority of the content isn't driven necessarily by the youth. There's a big subset of it, and they set the trends. But a lot of the actual content at scale is being done by the generation ahead. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of the mid-30 something. It's the parents of those kids that are often driving the content machine.
Are you talking about the Costco universe?
Bro, the Costco universe. The Costco universe is next level, baby.
That's the Rizzler.
The young Rizzler is I don't. We can't get into that right now.
I need
okay?
you two to stop it right now.
I think I must actually be spiritually older than you, Berkey, because I have reached a point where I don't give a single shit about any of the stuff you were just talking about.
You're trying to tell me you don't know about the triple chocolate chunk?
I absolutely don't.
It's the double chocolate chunk.
Chocolate chunk?
I have gotten to a point where I have accepted that I'm 37 and I am going to lose track of everything that the kids are into these days, and I don't pay any attention to like trying to keep up with it. I've just accepted it.
But I think the issue with having that mindset, of course, when you're talking about like pop culture, who gives a shit? That's not going to be important to your day to day. But I think the issue there is then there becomes a great disconnect between the generations, and that does carry forward into everyday life. It carries forward into politics. It's very hard to expect the next generation to look after you or us or whoever and be responsible if you're so disconnected from them. You don't understand their wants, needs, and desires.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that. I mean, I should clarify that this is when I'm saying all this stuff, I'm mostly talking about the pop culture stuff. Like but
that influences them way more than policy.
Yeah, I guess I would consider myself very informed about what's actually going on in the world, and then I think that the thing that I am less informed about is how are people 15 years younger than me reacting to all the stuff that's going on in the world.
Right.
And that's because I'm not on TikTok. I'm not like actively following stuff like that. And I guess a big part of that is only having so much brain power to sort of dedicate to, like, it's enough just to try to stay informed about what's actually going on. Yeah, I mean, there is a benefit to having that connection with people younger than you that kind of leads you to being able to understand the world a bit better. But I suppose it's,
I think especially
like in your point, like the generation that's 3 years removed from me.
Yeah.
They see the world very, very differently than we do.
Yeah.
But because you have social media, you get to literally keep up with everything that's happening at the same time. You could be just as brain
Some of
rotted.
it becomes a meme to me, but yeah.
But you could be just as brain rotted as the 13-year-old kids in middle school that are coming up with the new trends.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, to Hunt's point, I think it's specifically important for people in a position to educate, though, because if you're incapable of closing that gap, it becomes more difficult to communicate. And we are going to come in contact with, like, from the coaching sphere, we're going to come in contact with plenty of 20 to 28-year-olds that are not just looking for strategy, but also looking for a little bit of guidance in this industry, and even outside of it. So in my mind, of course, it all boils down to like, what responsibility do you feel you share in influencing the next generation moving forward? But I guess I just view it through the vantage point of, I don't really ever want to be disconnected from any one subset of the world, whether it's my parents' generation that's older than me or my nephew's generation that's coming up. I want to have some common ground that we can all, kind of understand each other with. And then this carries forward into things that aren't age related, whether it's gender related or, race related or whatever. It's like we all live totally different experiences, but there's a lot of common shared ground too that I think, shockingly enough, social media does a really fantastic job of kind of like laying out there. The difficulty is if you fall down the trap of just your curated echo chamber, which I think is really fucking common for what it's worth. And I think we've seen the problem of like the fallout of that, like just Vertucci being a great example. You surround yourself by people who never really push back on anything you do or say, and then you just hit that block button every single time somebody ever calls you into question. Next thing you know, you're getting Me Too'd and booted right out of the fucking community that you tried to build so hard, you know? Yeah. So what does this have to do with downswings? That's the question. I do think that there's a big parallel here. I know we maybe went on the Twitter social media thing a little bit longer than intended, but I do think that there's a bit of a parallel here, especially whenever you start to just frame things for what they are, which is negative feedback, right? For better or for worse, when you're downswinging, and particularly downswinging hard, like you can't breathe, there's no end in sight. It's been days, weeks, months since you've been able to book a significant, meaningful win, whatever. That, for better or for worse, is the only real feedback that you're getting. And in a game that is so wrought with variance, it's not really particularly helpful feedback, right? It's just this piling on, similar to like what you feel on social media whenever you start to get these negative feedback loops. It just becomes this piling on effect where it's like, how on earth do you ever escape? And as somebody who's gone broke a time or two, I got to tell you,
8.
Not 8. We exaggerate exactly
3.
what my timeline was. It was probably 3 times that I effectively.
Somewhere between 2 and 8. I guess we've arrived at.
It's honestly, I think it's cooler that if you go broke more. You know?
But that's why I'm saying it's exaggerated.
You should do it a few more times.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
not anymore.
Nothing cool about going broke.
No. It's different when like now that he is where he is. Like you don't obviously going broke would be like a disaster. But like if you're just starting up and like you had some money, go broke, had money, go broke. Like it's more resilient than not.
I agree with you. I just don't want to be hyperbolic all the time when talking about this. Like if we're
can't pick and choose hyperbolacy.
Hyperbole.
Hyperbolacy.
Hyperbole.
I'm trying to say all of them combined.
Okay.
Like the policy of being hyperbolic.
Okay, sure, whatever.
Somebody call 911.
Or
just call Andy.
Like the truth of the matter is
Go broke
that
again.
I went broke in I guess it was like 2007, my very first World Series. I came out here, and even then it was like I never actually had $0. I just went effectively broke. I came out here with like 10K. I dusted it playing sit and goes. I went home and I, had maybe like 1,500 online or something like that I was able to spin back up. And that was after me having had, I think maybe at my peak like 30K or something along those lines. Then it happened again. Oh no, I guess that was what led to me, because when I moved to Vegas, I was effectively broke.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was basically 2007, all of 2007.
Right, because we moved here in 2008.
Yeah, so all of 2007, I was relatively broke. But even then, I went to Arizona and like ripped that tournament off right away for $20,000. So it's like, yeah, I didn't recoup my entire roll, but I had a working amount. Came to Vegas, I had like 10K or something like that. Was lucky enough to win a tournament, have like 35. Then I went broke again in 2009. That's when Brent started backing me online, and I ran that up to a good amount. Ended up going deep in the main event. Had a, I guess, 300K roll.
Is this a Duhamel year?
Yeah. And that carried me through to 2013, where, you know, between backing and losing and a series of unfortunate events, I eventually went broke that year. And that was the third and final time.
Didn't you get like a
Were you
macaroni
involved in
and
that
cheese
series of
shop?
unfortunate events?
I mean, I might have been a little bit.
He played a heavy hand. What?
I said, didn't you get like a macaroni and cheese shop or something?
Oh, man, that was way out. No, that was when I had money.
You might be rich now because of that. Mac and cheese. There's always money in the banana stand.
This is so dumb.
Yes.
That is a quality
Great
reference.
That is a great reference. That's Uncle Dan's favorite reference, by the way. No, this was like, what he's referencing was maybe like 2016. I had too much money at that point. It was the opposite. I had way too much money.
I have never heard this story.
I had
What is
no
this story?
fucking idea what to do with it. And I was friends with somebody all the way back from like 2003. I'm not going to out him because
Brian LaManna.
but he was very wealthy. That
disqualifies.
He was an entrepreneur. I mean, I guess, and he is an entrepreneur. That's the best way to describe him. But he just was like one of those guys who had his hands in everything and never really settled on anything. Well, one of his ideas took off, made him multiple millions, and then, you know, he went and did his thing. One of the things that he got into was opening a Chipotle-style macaroni shop in Toledo, Ohio.
Wow.
Which seems like the right fucking place for it. I got to tell you. The idea seemed like a no-brainer.
Like, what kind of stuff do you want on your mac and cheese?
Yeah, just gourmet mac and cheese, buffet style, like whatever.
You get like mac and cheese with chicken, mac and cheese with like steak, like pick a protein, pick
Sound
like
pretty good.
extra stuff,
It sounds
different
so
sauces.
good. I should have just fucking bought the inventory instead of investing in a company.
Bad idea.
The thing is like
supply of mac and cheese.
you can eat Chipotle almost every day. Could you really eat mac and cheese every day?
Right.
Like that was
So I think my memory's a little fuzzy, but I think I invested $25K in the restaurant, not even a restaurant, it was a fast food place, and I think I lent $25K at like, I don't know, 6% or something along those lines.
And
I was paid back a very small amount, and the place collapsed, obviously.
did he go to Fiji with All American Dave?
He did not. He never ducked me.
All
but
American
like,
Dave is in Fiji?
Yeah.
Wow.
He always lived there. He just came back for the summers.
Oh, okay. Wow.
All Fiji Dave.
Yeah, he never ducked me or anything like that, but it was just a good example of like, don't fucking invest in the restaurant business. Don't invest in the bar business. Like, these things have a high failure rate.
Right.
Very low success rate, and you have to be very fortunate to get in there.
You tell that to every bar that's literally on any block, every corner in
Here?
Vegas. It's insanity.
Every bar in Vegas is
all you
a
have to, all you
is
have
a
to
chain.
do, Connie, is go back to that same bar every 3 years, and
It's
it's gonna have
something
a new
different.
name.
Yeah,
Right.
I've never seen a city like Vegas. There are no unique bars. They're all fucking chains. They're all PTs and like whatever the other. I don't even know what
Does Buffalo Wild Wings count?
Yes.
It does, but there aren't that
That's
many
a
of them
national
here.
chain, but
Yeah, but like that's not the one we're talking about. PT is just insane.
Yeah, PTs has
Well, they have
done
market share. I mean, they
Lodge.
own
the
everything.
Lodge,
now,
yeah. Negrano used to. There used to be a billboard of Negrano being
he
the
was
face
sponsored
of PTs.
by
He was the face of
insane.
PTs.
Yeah, like
That's
way
not-
when we first moved out here, like 2008.
That's wild.
Who knows what he got paid for that? But
He does. We should ask him.
but I digress. I don't remember exactly where I was going with this.
Being broke.
I know that
Then
much,
having
but
too much
I don't
money.
remember why being broke was important.
I don't even remember how I interrupted you.
Shocker.
I think we're like 3 or 4 tangents deep now.
Yeah.
We went on a tangent from a tangent from a tangent. And now we
Tyler's
can't
very
remember
upset.
where we started.
Tyler's very upset. Whatever I was saying, he was like, "I need this. Start cooking, Burke." And then you took me down a macaroni path.
Yeah.
And now here we are. What I was getting at though is like with downswings, there really is no way to measure, unless you're an online player who can like take a sample of hundreds of thousands of hands and run them through a database review to figure out like just how much you're leaking here and there.
Even then, like, it's hard
Variance,
to
bro.
know, and it's also like when it comes to the frequency you're doing something is going to be different than the individual hand itself. like something that Rabbit Chow does very well is look at through database reviews, and he has custom things that he looks for, like flop check raises and turn delays and things along these lines, where it's like, if you're not hitting frequencies here, that's like a very big problem that you can hone in on, versus the database where if you're always mixing something that it seems reasonable, it's just going to give you a check mark.
I actually think this is much easier for heads up, because at least my understanding from the little bit of study I did is heads up is like very rigid in the map through which you study, right? Like there are just prefixed lines and you have to, or prefixed nodes, and you just have to know them all. And it's easy because it's a 1v1.
And you can do a lot more, like specifically prepping your sizings for certain types of spots. Like in 3-bet pots, I have these sizings. In single raise pots, I have these sizings, and so on.
It's just very, it's a truncated game tree because you're playing 1 versus 1 instead of 1 versus 5 different spots. Like you don't have to say, okay,
with variable stack depths.
Today's low jack versus button, or today's under the gun 8 versus big blind.
Right, you can't look at all the formations, you can't look at all the lines and stuff like that.
So you have to simplify it down for yourself, where you kind of mix U8, U7 together, low jack, high jack cutoff kind of together, and then like button as a special thing because it's you open wider. So like, but when it comes to cash games, it's easy to do when you go through like hand database lookup, like Patrick Howard, a great example for Detox that knows how to do that stuff super well. But I would gamble that they would gain more from looking at somebody's hands than running it through the Wizard database and giving you a percentage score. Because the score might come out okay, like you're playing like 90%, 85%, but Patrick's like, every time you get check raise, you fold. That's a problem. Like you're folding the mixes, you're not finding the continues or the barrels in certain spots, and this is clearly impacting your win rate more than getting this check mark in this spot versus
And when I did a lot of work with Detox's MTT guys during the early part of, I think it was 2020 and 2021, maybe a little bit. No, it was just 2020. I did a lot of work with their MTT guys, and a lot of it was focused on figuring out from the databases that they have, like what are the stats that we need to be looking at the most? Like how do we want to build a process for evaluating players on how they're performing on certain stats? And you can do that when you're looking at large samples of data. In particular, if you have the ability to take 20 different players and just merge all their hands into one database, you can figure out what actually matters. But when you're an individual person, and even when you have like a 100,000 hand sample or something, particularly with tournaments, but also with cash games, there's just so many different types of spots that even looking at a database doesn't always give you a clear idea of whether you're on a downswing or not, because it can tell you, am I running bad or good in the all-in pots, but it can't necessarily tell you, am I running into the top of my opponent's range more often? You know, am I running into like spots where they actually would be over bluffing and I bluff catch, but they happen to have it in this particular spot? You know, the samples that you actually need for that is just massive,
like,
you know?
To a degree, everyone gets value paid, like sick value, like nuts versus second nuts. Everyone gets coolered at roughly the same amount long term. But in the small instances, like in the month-to-month samples or like these in tournaments, it's obviously way worse. What's important is like, where are you not fighting too hard or not enough in the smaller pots that are making up for that downswing, where you could have saved a couple of big blinds here, you could have not gone in the spot there. Like there's a bunch of different things, which is more important than, oh, like I had a set and he had a higher set. Like,
right, but only online with a reasonable sample could that ever even be divulged or quantified.
And that's what we're saying, I think. Just that when you're in a downswing, if you mostly play live, it's so hard to know if you're doing the wrong things or not.
So that's where I was going with this. When you're talking about in the live realm, or if you're online and you don't have much of a sample, there isn't any feedback outside of the P&L. Right? There isn't really any feedback other than the most memorable hands where the money went in. And sure, sometimes you can point to one where it's like pretty egregious, where it's like, that was a pretty big error on my behalf, and that might have cost me a lot of bottom line. But it's very difficult to find a pattern. It's very difficult to find a trend. And because of that, it's very difficult to take actionable steps to get yourself out of these downswings. So they really can be prolonged. And yesterday, Hunt, you weren't here for this, but we were talking a lot about what if you were to start over fresh today or tomorrow at 21 years old and the whole world is your oyster, how would you go about it, kind of thing? One of the things that I kind of landed on is that question actually isn't for the guy starting, because they have no experience in the space, and whatever path they choose is the path they choose, and there'll be variance involved, and people will be picked. There's survivorship bias. That question is actually more posed for the guy who's been at it for many, many, many years, going through that rough, turbulent cycle. The guys that we're kind of talking about when we're talking about people who go on Twitter to shit on other people to make themselves feel better because they're desperately seeking validation because they're not actually getting it through the game itself. That's who that question's posed for. And the answer is very challenging. It's difficult to come up with one because there isn't really any other feedback available, right? There's no way for me to go through and analyze my play over the last month, 6 months, year, 5 years, 10 years, right? All I can look at are my results, and I can internalize some of the bigger spots that I played. I can go watch a few hundred hands that I played on stream and see if anything obvious sticks out. But the issue is like a hand that I played in 2017 is going to be wildly different than how I think about the game in 2024. And so now all of a sudden we're comparing apples to oranges, and I don't even know how helpful that is.
Right.
So what then do you look for, or what actionable steps can you take to actually pick yourself up by the bootstraps when things are seemingly going bad with no end in sight?
Yeah, I think for me it comes down to having a game plan of how you're actually going to manifest an edge, and then evaluating yourself according to how close am I to actually putting that game plan into practice, right? And in the cases that I look at with my students, a lot of the time it comes down to they're trying to get better at playing a strategy that is closer to optimal. They're exploiting their opponents in particular, but that's going to be variable depending on what the exact context is. So if your goal is I'm trying to improve my ability to play a more well-rounded strategy, then you have to evaluate yourself in how close am I getting to achieving that? Am I playing hands in a way that reflects the type of strategy that I'm actually trying to implement? Or am I trying to implement one strategy, but then the strategy that's actually showing up when I play is completely different? And in the end, the reason people struggle so much with that is because they don't actually have a clear strategy in mind that they're trying to implement. They don't have a clear sense of, this is how I'm going to win in these games by implementing this kind of a strategy. They just kind of show up and hope for the best. And that's where you start having issues because you can't evaluate yourself accurately.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also think it's a latency issue as well. Sometimes the pool adjusts and it's very difficult to quantify. So you don't really recognize in real time that like things that had worked for you for a very long time no longer do, or working less efficiently, and now all of a sudden you're taking on more variance as a byproduct.
It's just so rough too in the live environment, especially when you can study a lot, play a hand that looks good theoretically, and you know it might just be burning it.
Yeah.
Just totally burning it. You look at the solve, it's like, oh, like looks fine to me, like it's a mixed call or it's a pure call, but you're playing in an environment where the river check jam is just only value hands, and you're actually burning money by putting in the
right. Or you look at the range that you set because you're just using the defaulted pre-fill.
Right.
And
You look at the big blind 3-bet and they have like suited middle connectors, and the range is just top left.
Yeah, they have like king 5 off, and you know all these other low frequency hands.
They have king 4 suited.
In,
They have queen 6 suited. They have like 8. Like button big blind is like the biggest one. You know, like you have to have so many middle connected suited stuff or like gapper type hands that never exist. You will never see a 6-9 suited from a big blind 3-bet playing 1-3 cash unless you think that the guy is like torching.
Somebody's been down in the live stream.
No,
his tone has changed from 6 months ago.
I don't have to. No,
I got the jacket
enough. I don't even have to be there to know that these don't exist.
I know, but now you really know they don't exist.
But we've always known this to be true. But like, if you're studying with this in your mind that this is how people play the game, you're going to make mistakes by default. You're going to add extra combos that don't exist, and you're thinking, oh, I'm pure paying combos that are really, really good, and you're burning money.
That's always been the conversation, right? Like, yes, we have always known that this is the imbalance, but you know, we've had this conversation in the past where you would just go, I don't know, man. I mean,
it's different for you when you're playing higher stakes poker. You know,
it's slightly different.
It's not slightly different. It's just a different game. You play a different game.
Slightly different.
You play a different game.
I do play a different game, but they also don't have the 6-9 suited, right? Like they
some people
come
might.
closer. They come closer to the frequency.
Sure.
But they're still miles away from hitting it.
Well, I think
know they're miles away because I'm not totally accurate with it.
I think what you're speaking to is they're coming closer to the frequencies. They're just not getting the specifics, right? So it's like they have the 6-5 suited instead of the 9-6. And that may not be the right candidate for that spot.
I think even more specifically, it's like they always 3-bet the ace, jack, ace, queen.
Right. They never find the mixes.
They never call those hands.
Right. So if you looked at the frequencies in a vacuum, it might be like 10% versus 12%.
Exactly.
But the actual range construction is completely different.
Yes.
Yeah. It's much more linear or whatever.
Right. And you curate strategies around that. That's a skill set that I would argue is something I'm quite good at. Right. And most guys in the live realm, like when you look at a guy like Garrett, it's kind of, that's for your headphones.
I thought the other end had come out.
No, I know. When you look at a guy like Garrett, who is like wildly celebrated for being the end boss when it came to these live streams, and we never saw him downswing, although I'm certain that he actually went through them.
Yeah.
It was very easy to just always give him credit because the cards were face up and the moves he was making were relatively correct according to what his opponent held. We never really held him under the microscope of like, well, what does this do in theory? Like theoretically, that's just terrible, blah, blah, blah. Because you give him the benefit of the doubt. You recognize he's a talent. You recognize that like his intuition is curated in a way that the average viewer can't relate to.
It's easy to give credit.
Well, I think it's actually hard in this space to give credit. I think most people are very reluctant to give credit.
I think if you respect somebody, you give credit.
Yes, but what I'm getting at more so is that people who see a foreign environment still try to they still try to insert or force their knowledge of their environment into it, right? So when you have a guy who's just like studying vacuum spots all day long, they'll try to rigidly make live poker fit that vacuum, and it just doesn't. It just doesn't, right? Just like if you take a live guy and put him online, he's going to start to apply a lot of the things that he knows to be true about
like
live.
Calling opens and
who call way too wide, like way too wide in the early nodes, way too tight in the late nodes, because that wins live.
I just mean even pre, like online is turned into like
I'm saying pre too.
Yeah, like a very 3-better full type of game.
Yeah.
Where in live, like it's
very
not
splashy.
It's just that
that's what I'm saying.
Call,
like,
you take flops, like
right.
you just get raked when people squeeze.
Good players live are generally way too wide early and way too tight late. When all the big money goes in, they have it, right? But in the early portions of the tree, they're speculative.
Yeah.
If you apply that online, they're going to be a whale.
Yeah.
Not just a fish. They will be a whale. And they won't understand why they're losing, and they won't realize that like the two environments have very little overlap outside of the game that they're actually playing.
It's like, man, like how am I getting so unlucky as someone that plays like would play too many hands? Like how am I getting so unlucky or losing by not realizing how much they're giving away by like calling it open and then calling the 3-bet and then calling the c-bet and folding turn or just folding versus the c-bet in the first place, where in live poker they've had enough experience to call or play a lot of pots in position, wait for the c-bet check or wait for the flop check. It's like, okay, this guy's weak. I'm just going to bet. It doesn't matter what my hand is. I know the spot is good.
Yeah.
And it's different of like a game of spots versus a game of technicality.
Exactly. And the thing with live is that there's a big amplification for every spot that you play. Like it does become a 1-of-1 because there's a ticking clock and you can't sit there forever. There's also the effect of having 7 other people at the table judge the decisions that you're about to make and do so cumulatively over and over and over again. So I do think, generally speaking, people struggle to give credit where credit is due, and they also struggle to acknowledge the intangible skills and how much they actually might outweigh technical skills at the end of the day. That's why there are these guys who look like, rogue outliers, like a Jesse Lonis type, like a Garrett type, maybe even a Pocket Dog, Darren Elias type, where it's not that they don't understand theory. It's just that they are bucking the trend of trying to apply it uniformly, and they're willing to step out on a limb. The difficulty is, and bring this back full circle to the conversation we're having, is that when that goes wrong, it goes really, really wrong, and it goes very far awry. So it's tough. And speaking from somebody who's currently in one of the biggest downswings personally I've ever had, it's very hard to measure precisely where the rubber meets the road. How much of this is my own doing? How much of this is regressing to the mean and variance catching up? How much of this is the pool adjusting? And to be quite honest, I'm not really sure, because right prior to the biggest downswing, I had one of my biggest upswings if you're looking at like an hourly thing. So it's very difficult to judge, and the only real bedrock that I can lean back on is mental game, right? Because it's like, yes, I'll get in the lab and I'll sure up my theory just in case there are leaks I'm not aware of, and make sure that my baseline strategy is still as bulletproof as I can make it. You know, I'm imperfect. I'm human. I know I'm going to make a lot of errors, but the general framework through which I'm thinking, I want to ensure that that's pretty locked in. But that's only going to go so far, right? Like, I'm still just going to lose kings versus ace king for a 650 big blind pot, right? Like, that just happens. You can't correct for that. I'm still going to find myself in these very difficult spots where maybe I get greedy and go for 3 with top pair, top kicker, and a 3-bet pot, which theoretically is fine, but in my environment, I'm forgetting that like it crosses a certain threshold, right? I can't really adjust for any of that if I'm not in a frame of mind that is receptive to general feedback, right?
It's just tough and weird in the sense of, if you're someone that fully takes theory into account as your baseline and saying, okay, I'm just going to trust this, that's a potential roadblock, but then also not caring about that at all is another potential roadblock. So you kind of have to find this middle ground of, this is important. What have I seen? How much can I gain or learn from each hand that I play? That it's not even about how much money goes in, right? Because it's easy to look at that stuff in big pots. It's easy to attach yourself to your plus minus based off those big pots. But what about, like, good example of like Marinelli? Marinelli looks at every pot he plays that's over 5 big blinds. So every single raise pot he's looking, and he's online to be able to do it. And in your case, you have some online spots that you're probably able to do it if, like, screenshot the hand, move on, screenshot the hand, move on. But in live, like, you just kind of have to write down every hand you play.
It's night and day. Nobody could ever do what Marinelli does live. It's just not. It's
no,
not
but
feasible.
you can track every hand you play, every single raise pot. You can track every VPIP.
It wouldn't be worth it.
Why?
Because Marinelli's doing it over 1 million hand sample.
I'm not even in that sense. Just like every time you play a session live, every hand you play.
I understand.
Even the spots you feel like are routine.
I understand. And then we end up with a hand sample of 5,000 hands over months.
Yeah,
I think what Landon's saying is Marinelli is, when he reviews a session, he's individually looking at individual hands, not that he's looking at a larger sample.
I totally understand that. I'm saying that by routinely doing that, you are getting to you're getting to analyze a very large sample of data and move the needle a tick one way or the other. He needs that level of precision because he's playing massive volume, and any sort of inconsistency that he may have or imbalance that may show is going to show up in other people's trackers. It's going to show up in MDA. It's going to show up in all these places that make him very exploitable. If I were to do this for a year live, I would be looking at like 25,000 hands, maybe 30,000 hands total.
But some things that you might find in said hands, regardless of experience, like, call it, I played the spot looks like this, you'll potentially unlock a way of thinking about poker spots that you wouldn't have thought about before.
I think to what you're speaking to, I think the idea that you're speaking to is correct. I think the methodology is not the proper way of discovering.
Sure, you could do it.
I think what you're speaking to, and I can say this pretty confidently as a live guy, is you just find yourself in these one-off tough spots that you didn't expect to have happen, and it forces you to go down an idea pathway, right? Like the other day, actually, I played a hand versus Dylan where I check raised king 4 of clubs on queen 7-5 rainbow, big blind versus button, and the turn was the queen backdoor, but not my backdoor, and I just kind of froze. I was just like, wow, I really have a lot of conflicting ideas on that particular card with my particular candidate. And I ultimately just check folded.
I think that's just good.
I think it's good too, but it forced me to go look. It forced me to start analyzing not just that hand on that board with that turn.
It's your strategy.
But the strategy of check raising big blind versus button with a high-low combo that has, an overcard and some backdoors when the obvious cards don't fall. Because the strategy for when the turn is a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, or club is very simple. But when it's a 9, 10, jack, queen, ace, and it's not a club, it becomes a lot more complex. And that became very clear to me of like, I have a small blind spot here on what to do when I don't get the immediate fold and I turn very poorly. And by default, I might just be check folding. And the reason why the queen particularly drew this out of me is because it's good for my range. It's obviously a good range card when I check raise. But my immediate default here is it's bad.
I have
no equity. He's picked up backdoors, so I lose fold equity versus his floats. He also just has a queen at a reasonable frequency. And so now I'm able to go back and examine ideas, right? And I think that is the best a live person can do. So where you're talking about Marinelli scrutinizing for precision, I think the best a live player can do is scrutinize for concepts.
Well, it's more like strategic accuracy, if you will. Like he's not like I'm not saying to do this to find every spot you ever play and be perfect, but it's more so if you write down a bunch of spots, you will inevitably find spots you have no idea what's going on. And when you have that inclination, you should look at it.
Yeah,
and now we have the tools to be able to do that quickly and efficiently.
Right.
Where before you'd have to run your own sim, wait, and now it takes 5 seconds or less.
Right. The bigger point that I was trying to make, though, is none of this matters if you aren't in a mental state that is capable of receiving this sort of information. And again, drawing upon my own experience, having gone broke 3 times, having a long career of up, down, the downswings can be so detrimental to your growth, not just as a poker player, but as a learner, as somebody who's trying to it obviously even extends out into like personal life type stuff. But if the beaten down mentality absorbs you, you can't accept any sort of feedback when it comes to strategy, because the immediate instinct is to be defensive and just say like, no, everything's going fine. I'm getting unlucky and I'm going to break out, because that's the only way you'll ever get to breathe, right? Because we acknowledge we don't have control over the variance. And we have to accept that a large part of our swings, both good and bad, are just simply due to luck. So when somebody wants to critique you and criticize you when things are going poorly, it feels like you're being piled on. It feels like somebody's stepping on your throat.
Well, you feel like you're not good enough, and by default, when someone criticizes you, you also feel like they think you're not good enough too.
Yeah, to some degree. But I also just think it's like an amplification, right? Like nobody's doing this when you're winning.
You're not doing this to yourself when you're winning.
I mean, I personally am.
I didn't mean you.
Yes,
I meant the proverbial you.
Right. You're not scrutinizing your play very much when you're winning, and neither are your peers, right? Very rarely are your peers.
I mean, depends. I guess it depends on your peers.
Well, it also depends on like how much you're divulging. You're gonna just naturally tell fewer hand histories when you're winning, and when you do, they're gonna be dunks.
Right.
Right. So when you're losing, it's like what Hunt was saying at the onset of this show. Like now all of a sudden, like it's like, okay, I got an 150 big blinds pre with ace king suited in a 4-bet pot. Is this okay? You know what I mean? Like now you're getting to the point where you're scrutinizing like literally every time 100 blinds goes in the middle.
I think it just comes down to the longer you've been around poker and the more downswings you've experienced, the more you can kind of have a feel of, am I doing something wrong? Or is this variance working against me? You've had so many downswings in your life. You've had so many upswings in your life, where in this specific instance, we can point to a few hands that make up the bulk of the downswing.
Right.
So it's like, okay, like in this case, I'm getting unlucky, and maybe there's some strategic things that you can clean up or patch up. And when you're losing money, you're more invigorated to do that because you don't want to lose money anymore.
Yeah.
But at the macro scale, in your case, it's most likely I've lost some all-ins that are unfortunate.
And I will say, like, I'm very neutral about it. Like, this is probably, given the size of the downswing, this is probably the most neutral I've ever felt about losing. Like, just wake up and you're ready to do it again the next day. It's not that big of a deal. But it's also because, like, financially I can handle it, number one. And number two, it is kind of like what you're saying. Like, I'm grizzled in a certain way. But I will say, and this is like the bigger overarching point I was talking about with downswings in general, the fact that there's no real actionable item to act on is very debilitating. Because there's
terrifying.
There's that aspect of like, what if it doesn't end?
Right.
Now the actionable item becomes like de-risking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's probably like a mental flaw, just because if you have live, it's hard because of the non-provable win rate kind of thing. But I guess this is where community comes into play more so than anything else. Trying to figure this stuff out alone is going to be very difficult because you see the game the way you see the game. But having people that you know that have graduated through the stakes or have a community of people you respect where you can gain confidence through others versus just having this yourself, especially when you don't know if you're actually good or not, or you don't have that feeling that this will end. Because when you have the defeatist, this will end, you'll start playing like it's never going to end too.
I think when you have like, if you're a winning player and then you go on a downswing, there is almost certainly some negative variance that's taking place.
Yeah,
but
for
to
sure.
what degree is where the issue
How much
lies.
does that compound to
start
a
playing
deteriorating?
bad? Right. Yeah, exactly. Because like you're almost certainly running bad. If you're a winning player and you're on a big downswing, you're almost certainly running bad. But like, how much of it is the run bad? Is it the play bad? What kind of adjustments can I make? And it's so, like you said, you don't have enough sample size to figure it out when you're playing live.
It definitely piles on too, because like, let's say you're in the midst of a downswing and then you find a check raise, bet, jam, and you're bluffing and you get called. And you took a good line.
Right.
Like you played a good hand of poker, but you lose it. You think, am I the worst?
Mm-hmm.
Did I have to do this? Is this even necessary?
That's what it is. Is that risk necessary to take when I'm already compounding my losses?
But the real like key is that if it's good, it's just good.
Right.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to do that when you're losing and be like, oh, like here I go again, just running it off into the abyss.
They feel it too.
Yeah.
Fact of the matter is, I don't have any empirical data to back this up, but the fact of the matter is, you just get called more when you're losing. You just, I promise you.
Yeah, right.
I promise you do. There is a pulse to the game.
But
There's
maybe
a
that's
theory
part of
behind this.
Maybe that's part of the run bad.
Yeah, I read this a while ago, and I think it's one of the smartest and most interesting ideas that I've heard about poker. It's that your opponents get more information about your ranges when you're running bad. Because when you have bottom of your range, you bluff, and they have top of their range. They call down. They see information about what the bottom of your range is. But when you're running good, they don't get that information because either you just have it or they don't have a hand that can call and they end up folding and they still don't get any information about your range. So downswings are actually amplified because during a downswing, you're going to inherently be giving away more information to your opponents about your ranges. But during an upswing, they don't get anything to work with because you just always have it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting.
Right.
I've
Yeah, you
given
get
away a lot of information this month.
Oh man.
What's been going on, Guap?
Are you on a
Well,
downswing?
I just discovered. Sorry,
Are we all mutually downswinging right now? Are we syncing our periods?
Fuck you guys.
I'm downswinging because of you.
Hunt's over here killing it with the 10-7 off.
I just recently discovered that WSOE has a profit loss tab,
Okay.
and you can go in there and do it for a month, for 3 months, 6 months, and for the year, I believe. So I was just like, all right, let's take a look, and I saw the number, and it wasn't a number I expected to see. So for the last 3 months, I've basically been playing for like the minimum wage of like someone in 1961. Not good.
Wait, but you
But it's
track all
green.
your
Green is
sessions
good.
too, right?
What's that?
You track all your sessions, yeah?
I don't anymore. I used to.
Oh, you should probably start doing that again.
Yeah.
That way this number doesn't surprise
Why don't you anymore?
This is
Feels
gonna
bad.
sound like I'm bragging, but I was just always doing really well, and in the last 3 months.
Oh, you're the guy who like, well, there's more money in my account today than there was yesterday. So
yeah,
what the fuck do I do?
I always take out X amount, and then it's been a few months since I've taken any money out. So
Wait,
Don't you care about things like hourly and big blind per 100 and
I used to.
Yeah.
I used to, but now I'm working a lot more versus playing. So,
wasn't there a reason why you were down, though?
well, I subtracted that number.
So you're just trying to say shit's been going
I thought that's where you were going with the story.
Yeah, like, I'm like waiting for you to
what
say
he told
it.
me was he's like the number it was way lower than I thought
I
it
was
was going to
winning way
be.
before you got
and then
here.
he remembered you put him in all those all in.
Oh, yeah.
those- had like all those all in main event seats.
flip and goes or whatever.
Flipping, yeah,
But,
right.
it seems you went back and he's on the ship.
Yeah. 3 months have been tough.
I hope you're.
But the games have dried up.
I hope you're
so.
saving up an investment fund for all those all-in satellites this coming summer. Like we're really, you're going to get together a whole group of people and just fire those all-in satellites as much as you
Now we're
can.
I should have really pulled the plug. We won the first one.
Yeah, right.
And it was for you.
Right.
I know.
It can only go. It could never like you hit the peak.
Nah,
You're never
honestly,
gonna, like,
I could win two.
No, you had to be a good friend. You were gonna
Well,
play
it wasn't
the
even just that. I fired another. I won my very first one, and I fired like 6K of my own
Yeah.
on those
Well,
things.
obviously you're running good.
Right. I had to regress to the mean.
Yeah, your 10,000% return was not going to continue.
Eventually, you're going to get to like
man.
wasn't there a year when Chidwick won like 200 main event seats online?
They
or
weren't all in
something?
sats though. He was
No,
just better than everyone.
But like
Yeah.
eventually, you're going to have like 200 main event seats racked up because of all these all-in satellites because you've just fired 1 million bullets at them.
We'll give 'em away on the
eventually.
I got to tell you, that sounds really nice. That's $2
yeah.
million.
I honestly
you go.
think though, like the part of the downswing that's concerning is when you feel like you don't have enough money to sustain. Because if you
Yeah.
had $1 million and you were playing one no limit, so it was penny stakes,
Yeah.
and you lost $30, you wouldn't care.
No, that's true. I mean, the thing is like if you are a skilled gambler and you have access, you're always going to be a little bit overexposed, right? It's when you become a lot a bit overexposed that it starts to feel bad. And like, yeah, I mean, that's an annoying spot. I was in it a couple years ago. I'm probably coming closer to it now where it's like it's not that you're not going to be fine. Of course you're going to be fine, but you have to start making decisions on liquidity. And that's what's annoying, right? And not even just annoying, but like
You just feel the noose tighten.
yeah, it's where a lot of error can come in too. It's like, oh, well, if I start to de-risk on Bitcoin now and then Trump gets elected and these bags pump, that's going to be shitty. But also if I don't de-risk now, a lot of really bad things could potentially happen if this downswing persists.
Yeah, or you keep the same amount of exposure you have. You keep having losing sessions over and over again, and then you feel like, oh man, like I don't have enough money to sustain this anymore, which means I'm gonna have to do something else. And if that happens, that's really bad because I have to change my way of living,
Right.
and that's uncomfortable too. But like, let's just say you had $100 million and we were playing in Bobby's room. You wouldn't care if you're on this downswing.
I wouldn't care, but I also wouldn't care about the upswings. They'd be meaningless, and then my desire to play would also just...
Yeah, let's be real. If he has $100 million, he's
not
never,
playing
he's
in
never
Bobby's
playing.
If I win this Circus Survivor, you'll never fucking see me again.
I guess the whole point
That's
here,
it.
the whole point here is like, if you have enough money to sustain this would not be an issue to you if you know you're playing well.
That's partly true, but we're talking more granular here because the money does matter. Case in point, but also the fact that it matters is a good signal because it does force you to analyze things that otherwise you could fall neutral to and just put things in cruise control, right? If you're just playing with an infinite bankroll like a lot of recreationals are, of course you're not going to take a deep analysis as far as like what you're going to be like Guapo.
I was going to say it's Guapo, right?
You're just going to have more or less chips in the box.
What the hell
every
do I
day.
need
Who
to
cares?
check my
hating
hours for?
Stop hating on Guapo.
I can never go
Relax.
broke playing these stakes.
I guess in the sense of like, but that's also a way that you know that you're never fully at risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And being at risk, I think, is very necessary in any sort of gambling endeavor like this.
There's
right?
always an extent of how much risk you should have on the table, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you want to give yourself
That's always debatable.
a
right?
5%, if someone's more comfortable with a 5% risk of ruin, some people want to have a 0.01% chance of risk of ruin, you know? So these downswings.
I would honestly say those guys aren't going to make it, though.
I think a lot of it comes down to balancing out how exposed you are versus what your win rate is. Right?
Yeah.
Because in a game where you have a high win rate, you can afford to be overexposed because the standard deviation of your wins and losses is going to be lessened by the fact that you have a really high win rate.
You'll see that in the risk of ruin calculations too, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
If your win
And
rate is extremely high, the amount of capital necessary is low.
Precisely. And I think a lot of people run into issues where when they're playing a game, like particularly in tournaments, the desire is to want to be kind of underexposed because then, the variance of tournaments and how big the swings are is kind of neutralized a little bit. But the problem is when that happens and you're playing lower stakes tournaments, you're paying like higher rake, and now your actual ROI on each tournament is reduced, your hourly is reduced, and you get to a point where you actually would be better off accepting a little bit more exposure, playing higher for lower rake, because your ROI would be better, and the variance would actually neutralize itself over the long term. So there's definitely a balance to be struck there.
A lot of things to consider. I mean, I kind of just wanted to do this episode because I know that this is a big pain point for a lot of people. Everybody's going to downswing, and how you handle it is markedly different case by case, and it's really going to separate the winners from the losers, the elite from the great from the good from the break even, and the break even from the bad. Like, it doesn't really matter all that much what you do when you're upswinging outside of your spending habits. There are a lot of people who like have winner's tilt and make a little bit of money and have it spent before they ever log it in their win-loss record. So it's like, that's a little bit different, but generally speaking, you can't really do much wrong outside of like being massively overexposed when you're winning. But when you're losing, like Landon's right, the news starts to tighten a little bit, and everything now comes into play. Like, I can't tell you how many phone numbers suddenly came to mind where it's like, you know what? I haven't talked to Johnny in a while, and I think he owes me $3K. It's like, now all of a sudden that's worth chasing.
There's a macaroni store somewhere that owes you $50.
Goddamn right. No, there is no macaroni store. That for sure is dead in the water.
If he ever ends up in Toledo, Ohio, for some reason, we'll know what's going on. Like, we'll know you're chasing that macaroni money.
Give me that macaroni money back.
In other news, if I open a strip club, it's going to be called Winner's Tilt.
I love it.
I like that. Very niche clientele.
Yeah.
Very high-end
I don't know, man. The
clientele,
poker community loves to support small businesses.
They do. They love them titties, too. Just ask for Tucci.
Jesus.
Shout out to all the oranges.
Come on, man.
All right, that's going to do it for us. Let's get out of here on that note. We'll be back tomorrow. Jesse is going to be in studio, I swear to God, tomorrow. Like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you guys think. Let us know what your biggest downswing was and how you managed to claw your way out of it. Tomorrow will be Weekend Warrior. We're going to be discussing a little bit of sports ball. So, if you want to wait for the timestamps, do so. But Jesse will be here, so we'll talk plenty of poker.
Don't
We're
forget
also...
about our boy Ephro.
Can I fucking finish?
Never.
One time. We'll also be joined by Jen Shahade, who's going to call in halfway through the show. And it sounds like there may be a special guest who might be making his way in studio. One, Eric Froelich, who's going to be telling us why exactly all of our Weekend Warrior picks are complete shit. So be sure to tune in noon tomorrow. We'll catch you